Welcome to Journey Through the Gate, your paranormal portal podcast, as we delve into the many questions and wonders brought on by the supernatural experience. What's on the other side of the gate? Let's find out together.
How about that? Please show me some 5-5s out there, because it's been a day of, ooh, the delay is killing me. 5-5, can you hear me? Anybody? Mr. Cho? 5-5? 5-5? Yay! All right. Cool. All right, so here's the deal. It's been a very solemn week. We will stop and we will talk about that. Mr. Cho is in a green room right now. He's coming in. Good. Thanks, Fast. Hello, everybody. Mwah, I love you all. Kevin, you saw my thing. I did not get that link, but if you put it in the YouTube comments, I'm sure to get it. Not in the live chat because it disappears. So stick it in the YouTube comments, and I'll be able to go in there. I'll get a notification right quick, and I'll be right on that, and we'll take care of that, and I'll check into that. But I still think you're talking about chewing tobacco, right? The skull. No sound, Salvador? Try again. Hang in there. You guys can hear me, right? I'm on, sweetie. Some people can't hear me. Go in, turn up. Is your volume on? Check that first. like in Sling Blade, he asked if there was gas in the thing, and there wasn't. So, don't hate me for asking the silly questions. Hello, Ted. So, okay, good, good, good. All better. Yay. Okay, so it's been absolute. I'm gonna be dead honest with you. I've never lied to you guys before. It has been a hell of a week. Some of you know this. Some of you do not. Some of you only come in here on Sunday night. I lost my best friend and my brother. Man, he was an absolute warrior. You've seen him here on the podcast, Mr. Dickens McGee. But here's the kinder side of the tragedy. Um, I think he picked it. I think he picked this time. I think he showed this. Not everybody, people didn't even know him, love, and brought a lot of people together. Brought a lot of people to me during the week. You know who you are. If we spoke, if we shared an emoji, a gift, a little gift of a hug, some love around the world. This young man um, spent 17 years showing people how to love unconditionally and how to be a warrior and how to have class. And he has come to several people with, what I would call like a flash vision where you're in your day and all of a sudden out of nowhere, not even in your left field of thinking, comes this image of this beautiful orange baby wearing different kind of hats to leave personal messages to that person on they heard them say a certain thing about him, or I mean it's just he found so many keen and kind ways to say that he was okay. And we've been talking a lot about him and how much he's pulled so many people together, like I said, around the world, made certain things happen because he was there and changed the flow of things and, different stuff. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you for all the love. I promise you, he went out as beautiful as could be. And I thought about sharing and not sharing, thought about mentioning and not mentioning. I would be remiss if I did not. Ted, thank you so much. Oh, the memory. Okay. Absolutely thank you for him. He had a beautiful funeral. So many little synchronicities were happening along the way, so much togetherness, so many things that brought people together to show their kindness. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, little boogers, but they're around. And even if you know what we know in our hearts, I heard a phrase, I wanted to share it with you guys. The ears long to hear what the heart already knows. Beautiful. Yeah, I know. Was he a cool character or what, Glenn? I mean, he's coming here and telling me what time to go to bed. It's night time. Get your ass in here, woman. It's time to go to bed. It was all in control of everything all the time. I wanted to share with you guys for those of you who had not seen, and then we'll move past this because this is what he would want me to do. No doubt. I mean, he would, and he's let me know about it. But there's my sugar man. There's my monkey face. Beautiful soul, beautiful baby, beautiful brother. There he is. So there he is. I share this with you because I love you all and because so many people touched me throughout the last couple weeks. You guys were with me when we were trying to nurse him and everything else. But man, dude, he went out like a warrior. He did it his way. Dignity to the very end. And the last words I believe that he heard me say is love is eternal. And that is our message. And I thank you again for showing your love, for your support through multiple shows. We were all in this together, sending prayers and everything else. Like I said, he's found ways to come in and tell me, but I will share this one with you. The rest are a little too close to the surface, but they definitely affirm everything that we believe. But if you don't believe that little man skid across that rainbow bridge like it was a hot grease pig, you didn't know him because he was in charge of the room, man. But so anyway, you guys, a lot of you are familiar with a guest, and I'm going to bring Donnie on, but Donnie, bear with me here, honey. Um, Kathy McCarthy. I had her on. Oh, Vixen Doe, thank you so much. And thank you guys for all your DMs and your emails and the wonderful words you shared with me. For those of you who gave to the PayPal, I was able to buy his food like this. I was able to everything that they said to give it a whirl. My God, we did. And he lifted for a while and he was doing great. And then 17 years, he just kind of looked at me and said he was done. And with nothing but respect for him, we did a beautiful, we had a beautiful exit out of here. And I promise you, I felt him go through me. He had a beautiful soul. And the last thing you heard me say was love is eternal. And that is our theme here. And that is why I mentioned this tonight. I share with you because so many of us have been touched by loss of a loved one, fur, feathers, or no. And it takes a piece of us with them. I promise you, this one almost took me with him. Very close, I felt. But you move on a little bit at a time, a minute at a time. If you're lucky enough to have kind, loving people around you that also are going with it through it with you, it's a blessing. And you guys were definitely there for me, and I appreciate you so much. So without further ado, to Mr. Dickens McGee, we love you. And I'm going to share this quick story. So when Kathy McCarthy was on, she used a phrase that we often said when talking about Dickens. Do you know who I am? I'm the spoiled brat of the house. I'm the just rotten. He was like a little Sherlock Holmes. He was so smart. You know how the pets can be. So he got an appointment, let's just put it that way, with Kathy McCarthy, who is an animal communicator, both living and past. All right. And I'm like, sure, hey, let's go, let's try. So we did this, and Dickens was you're supposed to give permission to read the energy and tell the pet or that they have permission to do the same. What anyway? Long story short, energy, reading energy and permission, will and intent. So he goes through to her. Now she's busy at the time, and she's talking to two Dobermans and a Chihuahua. I told this earlier on Shannon LeGros' beautiful Into the Fray with Steve earlier for her radio show upcoming on her podcast. Anyway, he barges his way into this meeting, and she's already talking to these two Dobermans and this Chihuahua, and she's like telling the family, "Did you have an orange cat? Kind of bossy, kind of walked in like he owned the place, had a little toot on him." And she said, "No, I can't. Wow, I can't think of it. Did you have a cat?" And they're talking back and forth. If you can imagine, it's hysterical. You know, uh, uh, fill in your blanks the way you want to, but it's funny stuff. And she's like, "Look, you have to wait. I'm not supposed to talk to you later. I have a feeling who you're coming here for, and so but you're gonna have to wait till I'm finished over here." This is Kathy talking to my cat, Mr. Dickens, via psychic, whatever you want to call it. Okay, it's interesting stuff. She comes through the next day and tells me this and gives me, I would say, 4 or 5 key things that we have said, or little inside family jokes with, amongst us and the pet, the cats and stuff like that. You know it is. She gives me all these, and then there was one that I could not deny. And it was, "Do you know who I am?" And then she gave me another one that clinched it, about how we always lied that he was 10 and we really knew he was 15 and 16. And, we always called him a young man. So my brother passes. The very next morning, first morning without him, I woke up kind of like I was waking up out of a nightmare. Is this really happening? Is this really real? Reality, trying to get your bearings just that split second after waking up. But this time I sat straight up like I was having one of those fever sweat dreams, right? And I sat straight up and I was, blah, trying to get myself together. And I hear my husband Mario in the living room. He's falling asleep with the TV loud, and he's watching Godfather. And it's the scene where Mo Green is in Las Vegas and he's under pressure and he's in an office, and he slams his hands down on the desk and he leans forward and he says, "Do you know who I am?" Dramatic pause. "I'm Mo Green." But I heard, do you know who I am? And I do know who he am. He's my brother, my friend, Dickens McGee, and I thank you for sharing his love so graciously over the past couple weeks. Love yours. Take good care. And I'd also like to share with you something in his name. It's something called Pretty Litter. It was designed by a gentleman who lost his friend. And he got with some scientists. Now, I'm not big on chemicals and things like that, but it has wonderful reviews and a lot of vets approve. But it actually changes color when they're in the litter box to tell you early if they have a kidney or a liver or an issue or urinary tract or something like that. Because cats are very good at keeping their pain close to the fur, so to speak, and to hide their pain. And although I don't believe we could have saved Mr. Dickens because of his age, it may help another cat. And I believe it's 25 a month. If that's too much, find another cat owner, split it with them, because if it gives you 1 week head start, if it gives you 1 month head start, if it helps one cat, please remember Mr. Dickens. And I thank you. So, without further ado, I love you all, and let's bring in Donnie. I'm sorry I had to get that one done before we moved on. It's just too important. And welcome in, my dear friend, wonderful researcher and superhero in my book in a lot of ways, Mr. Donny Cho.
Hi. Hello.
Hi,
Can you
buddy.
hear me okay? Am I too loud or too low?
You are absolutely perfect, my friend. And I'm sorry
Okay.
that I didn't see an awful lot of the chats as it went by. Donnie, if you see you want to say hello, I suggest we do that now because it's been a long
Yeah, no, I was in the chat the whole time.
course and
Yeah, hey
six my
everybody.
team.
Hello Nightmare. To
Hey,
anyone who I didn't
Nightmare,
say
thank
hi
you guys
to.
so much. Ted, Linda, everybody here. Let's see
Yeah,
what I
hello
got up
Kevin
here.
Clow. Hey Sapphire
Uh,
Elf.
that music and everything else. I hope it set the. But hey, Susan Woodcarver, thank you, dear one, for everything you've done, and Aunt Edna and Kevin. Hello, I said hi to you earlier. If I miss anybody, come on in now and say. I think
Hello
I saw
Linda
Blue.
Lee.
I think I saw Blue. Vixen Doe, Aunt Edna, everybody. So tonight, Mr. Cho, would you like to tell everybody what we are doing? And again, thank you for being a friend. You guys are
Uh
like
it's my privilege.
Salvador, Sapphire. Oh,
Yeah, being friends with you is one of the most fortunate
common.
turns in like my recent
Oh,
years. So
what a nice
it's a privilege.
oh, sweetheart, that's what a nice thing to say.
Um
We had a wonderful conversation today. We are here by the grace of a young girl, I think I mentioned her in the beginning, named Katie. God bless you. Over there at the stream yard. God knows what, probably holding the whole fort down by herself over there downtown corporate stream yard, because that girl knew what she was doing. But I had to get rid of all my other browsers. I had to re-download it. I had to get Firefox. It was the only thing that would play the videos. But Donnie and I, how long have we been chomping at this bit? It's been a hard minute.
It's been a while. I don't even remember when we even started looking into it. Just because October naturally is going to be a very busy month for everybody.
Why is October
Um,
special in some way, Donnie? Is there something going on I
Apparently,
should know
there's
about?
stuff that goes on,
What
especially in
could
the
possibly
paranormal
be going on in
community.
October?
People get all excited about October.
Oh
So
my goodness, it must be the leaves. Do you think it's the leaves,
yeah.
Donnie? Do you think it
Excuse
just
me.
could be the leaves, or it could be pumpkins? Let's not
Oh
get
yeah.
back on the pumpkins. Last night in the chat, should we explain that real quick,
We
Donnie? What do
got
you
things
think?
got a little crazy last night in the chat, folks. For people who
Talking
weren't there.
about, hey, sweet Ted, pet your babies for me. Would you give them a hug for me, sweetheart, and have a hot toddy for me? It's a good thing I quit drinking. I'm telling you what, dude. You know, Jack and I did not speak this past couple weeks. But I
Man,
wanted
when
about 8
my
years of a good 12-year-old bottle of scotch, that's for sure. I just
when
stayed away
my
from it. Needed
when
it
my
too bad.
Pippa when my Pippa passed away in 2020 February, after I buried her, I just got like a big bottle of Johnny Walker Black, and I just locked myself in my room for several
Not
days.
blame you.
And
No judging here, man. I just know I can't
yeah,
do that.
that was
You
bad.
know, listen, I'm gonna just put it to you this way, chat. You tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, you tell me. Thank you, Ted. Drink it for me, sweetheart. Um, definitely have one for the Dickens. Little son of a gun was awesome. Still is. Still, he's still at it. Now I bet you're like a spirit guide now. He's going to get over there and he's going to learn quick. He's going to power through all that, whatever you go through, and he's going to be back here and he's going to be showing up. Up, count on it, because he was just too like that in life. He was
Yeah.
barely held back in life with his little the things that he did. But we Donnie and I have been digging at this. Let's dive in, Don. What do you think?
Yeah.
Chicago, man. Fuck Chicago.
Hmm.
And I mean, I had no idea until we started digging. We've been going at this. It's tragedy and bullets and haunts from one end to the other, as far back as the eye can throw. As you can throw your eye.
Yeah.
Is
Today
that
we're
correct?
talking about the city of Chicago, some of the legends
Yep.
associated with it, some of its history, some of its real dark history, and yeah, that place is kind of crazy. I didn't
Mm.
think much about it before we started doing all this research, but then
Does
once I
anybody
started
here live in
researching it, I was like,
Chicago?
that
Is
place is
anybody
kind of
currently
crazy.
now living anywhere near Chicago or Illinois, or has lived in Chicago? I don't know. The night Chicago. Yes, I remember that. The night Chicago died. I remember roller skating to that song. Wall roller skating rink. Boy, some things went down there. That's a whole nother show. But the night Chicago died. Yeah, that was a big deal. I think it was like sixth grade maybe when it came out. Jeez, man. Who did that song, Linda? You work on that. But anyway, you do not want to give a bottle of anything dark, scotch, whiskey, you name it, to a redhead Scottish Cherokee Lenape. I definitely don't want to give it tequila. Trust me, tried and tested. That would be me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm kind of the
right,
same way.
Jersey. It's not a good thing. So I stayed away from it. I did the right thing. I stayed away. You know,
You know,
um,
people still have legends in Korea that when you give
I
Donny Cho
did eat more
tequila,
than my fair share of chocolate. I've got to admit. I
mm,
got to admit. You know, the grief diet: coffee, black coffee, cigarettes, and chocolate. And the occasional toast. You guys know what I mean. But I'm back. So what do you say we crack open? So that's why Donnie and I were so panicked. Paper lace. Thank you. Heck yeah, it was paper lace. Wait, before your time, Donnie. So
mhm,
I made some videos, and what we did was, as we normally go at this, Donnie, we do like we did Lincoln and Amityville, and what was the other? Oh, McDonald case. What a
the
torturous,
McDonald case.
what a journey that one was. Right? I didn't enjoy. I enjoyed the journey. I hated that I had to take it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
That was a tragedy.
That was a tough
They're all
one.
tragedy.
That was a tough one.
Amityville
Um,
was a tragedy, wrapped in an enigma and a bunch of lies with truth,
mhm.
which are the sharpest ones. But this we dug at this the same way we did those. Donnie did some that I have not heard. I know of them, I just don't know details. And then I did some that Donnie had not heard. And I did mine via video and research, and as much audio visual as I could bring you guys. And I promise you, trust Cisco when she says some of these videos are kick ass. I'm I'm
And
learning.
I haven't
I'm
seen any
playing
of these
around.
yet, so I'm looking forward to it.
Get the popcorn, sit back, and get ready to be glad you do not live in Chicago, or that you ever have lived, or ever had a past life, maybe as one of these gangsters, or gangster's girlfriend, or on the wrong end of a gangster, bootlegger. We have cursed cows that were framed. We've got fires and tragedy and cracker jacks and serial
And there's
killers,
going to be some
ghosts.
serious paranormal stuff, especially when we go when we
And
towards the end
yep,
when we bring Steve on, and
Hmm.
Oh, we got some
Yep.
paranormal stuff. Don't you
Yep.
worry.
Linda's got it right here. Yes, Linda, we were all up in that. It's a wonderful book written. Can you throw the author of that book up here, Linda? I'd like to mention him. He's got wonderful interviews on YouTube from years back, as well as um, here recently, because they've picked up the movie, and Keanu Reeves is going to be playing the architect who was responsible for the Chicago affair, and what's his face Titanic could have fit on the door.
Leonardo
Yes, yes, yes,
DiCaprio. Yeah.
yeah, is playing H.H. Holmes, the son of a bitch. I mean, he can be
Leo
creepy.
is playing H.H.
Yes,
Holmes. Wow,
yes,
I did
yes,
not know
I
that.
believe so. Unless I have it backwards and it's Keanu and it's the other way. I could be wrong. I often am. So Miss O'Leary's cow. Yes, we're going to be talking about them as Al Capone. Yes, absolutely, Linda. But who wrote the book? Who wrote the book for Devil in the White City? I can't remember the author's name, but I did go through him. I did, listen to a lot of his interviews and stuff like that. Wonderful book, and they're basing the new movie that is coming out I believe,
Oh, Linda Lee said
after the
Eric
new year.
Larson.
After the new year. Here we go. Here we go. Eric Larson. Thank you.
Hmm.
It's as the architect. Yes, he is playing what's his face. I've got a little vid on this guy and the fair too. So we're touching all of that. That's what we're saying. We're trying to get as much in this episode as we can. We're already 29 minutes in. God bless. I spent a lot of time on Mr. Dickens, but I thought it was important to know that when pets cross, a lot of times you do get some quick little, I'm okay. I got to go do my thing. And then you get the little nails down the hallway and stuff like that, or the jump on the bed. And, I mean, just like I'm saying, it's important for you good guys to remember that, because I don't know who's going through loss or who just lost or will, soon. And we all just hang on to each other and be honest. We can't help each other if we're not honest, right?
Yeah.
What good is hiding stuff? We're not helping each other if we do that. So, not Keanu is. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it is. I think if you think about it, it fits. Leo could play a good H.H. Holmes. He's got that slimy texture to him, if you know what I mean. And I don't mean that as an insult, but let's be honest. It's like
Oh
somebody said
yeah.
last night
He
about Peppermint Patty. Somebody, I can't remember if it was Chris or Glenn, maybe said, "Come on, we all knew." It's
Leo
like,
can play
yeah,
creepy because he did a damn fine job in Django Unchained. I thought.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He can do that. I mean, he's got some acting chops in him. He's no what's his name? Oh, I can see his face and I can't think of his name. Dadgummit, I hate when it happens. Dracula, a
Oh, Gary
fantastic
Oldman.
actor. Thank you.
Yeah.
He's no Gary Oldman. He's no Tom Hardy either. But I digress. So, without further ado, you ready, Donnie? Here we go. Hang on. Donnie, I want to tell you as many times as I've asked Donnie, because you never know what you're getting into with me, do you, Donnie?
Hmm. No.
And I say, Donnie, it's going to be a rough ride. Put your seatbelt on. Are you willing to go? You can pull over at any time. He's always completed the journey every single time, and it got pretty scary sometimes, didn't it, Donnie? I mean, as
Mm,
far as we've known each other,
well,
there's
okay, I'm not going to give away
been
any
some serious
spoilers.
shit.
I'm not going to give away any spoilers, people, but there's this one topic that Cisco has been talking about doing together, and I'm just like, oh boy.
We're
Oh
going to do
boy.
it. What, Donnie? We're going to do it. We're
Yeah,
going to
like,
have a ball, and we're going to kick its ass.
yeah. It's
That's what
it
we're
got
going to
me,
do.
yeah.
Like
I
it's
got a little
already
nervous.
happened. I'll make a prediction, but that's all I'll say of that.
But
So,
that's in the
without further
future. We'll
ado,
get there. Yeah.
yes, without further ado, we would like to welcome you to
Oh,
Chicago.
Susan Woodcarver's from Born and Raised in
Oh,
Chicago.
are you, honey? Born and raised east side Chicago. Father was a beer trucker. Oh, hell yeah. So tough they called him the mayor of Marquette Park. I love that. So, Susan, you're going to feel right at home. I mean, no disrespect. I have nothing but you'll see my little things through this whole thing. Listen, a little history of Cisco. When I went to high school, I never got into school. There was some things I just really excelled at, like art, and I took a lot of that. And there was a lot offered back then. You could do like history and art appreciation and Renaissance, all kinds, all things, right? Took it all, and but sports ball, not so much. and like gymnastics, get away from me. All those things, and like the trigonometry people and the cake, all those. I was a rock and roller. I wore black leather and had different wild hair. So the whole thing I loved in history when you got to pick your genres. And I picked history of violence in America and a couple of other great courses. You can put them all together and make a year. It was fantastic. It was like the first time you got electives. And I took this and I got A plus all the way through. And it was gangsters, the beer wars, prohibition, Bonnie and Clyde. It was the history of the FBI and the CSI, early CSI stuff, and the Roaring Twenties and 23 Skidoo and all that shit. So I loved doing this, and there's going to be a heavy emphasis. I hope you don't mind on gangsters, organized crime, and I'm not elevating it, but I will say, full circle back to the beginning. Fair play is fair play. And I think some of these guys really got a shitty ending, you know, and got ganged up on and hoodwinked and bamboozled. And they were kind of straight shooters, pardon the pun, all the way through their criminal activity. I don't condone the criminal activity. I do. There is something to be said very heavy for me for loyalty. Do you see what I'm saying, Donnie? Did I
Yeah.
say that right? So I'm not condoning the violence and everything else, but the, there's a little style to it, I mean, just
And they had a
saying.
code, they had a code
That's what I'm
that they
saying.
lived
I'm
by
big on
and they
that,
adhered to. Yeah.
And
And
yeah, and I find myself very torn with the undercover stuff too. I know sometimes it has to be done, but I've never enjoyed watching a movie. There was one I think Charlie Sheen was in, or maybe it was Emilio, where they went undercover in a bike gang, to take them down. And the loyalty that you have in the brotherhood, and you're looking at each other's eyes and you're swearing on shit that matters, and you know creating that camaraderie, and then you're gonna stab them in the back. Yeah, I can't do that. So, as the same is here with some of the things you're going to see here, and you'll see it through it. Where I'm like, that isn't fair. I was never a fan of the lady in red, and you'll see her come up too. So, here's a little introduction. Uh, if there is a slight drag in the video, it usually straightens out. But keep in mind, this is brand new to Firefox tonight, so I'm glad we have any video at all. We were really going a little crazy trying to get this to you guys, but here we go. Donnie, ready? Hang on. Here we go.
Tragedy and bullets. Chicago. Welcome to the world of mayhem in Chicago's haunted and turbulent history. Massacres, Fort Dearborn, called the Windy City because of all the hot air blown around by the politicians and the crooks. Welcome to Chicago. Hauntings and mayhem. Chicago is known worldwide for a colorful gangster past starting during the 1920s and 30s, with murder and mayhem down every alleyway, speakeasies, and mysterious sidewalks. Chicago has proven to exhibit a dark past, from catastrophic events like the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 and the Eastland disaster to murderous mob wars, notorious Colombian expedition, and a serial killer named H.H.Holmes. Al Capone, who frequented the Congress Plaza Hotel during his heyday as a Chicago mobster, has been seen haunting it still. But old Scarface had his own ghost.
The St. Valentine's Day Massacre marked the end of any significant gang opposition to Capone, but it was also the act that finally began the decline of Capone's criminal empire. He had just gone too far, and the authorities, and even Capone's adoring public, were ready to put an end to the bootleg wars. Perhaps the strangest bit of history in regards to the massacre involved the fact that Capone had not seen the last of one of the men killed on that fateful day. It was while he was incarcerated in Pennsylvania that Capone first began to be haunted by the ghost of James Clark, one of the massacre victims and the brother-in-law of George Moran. While in prison, other inmates reported that they could hear Capone screaming in his cell, begging Jimmy to go away and leave me alone. After Capone returned to Chicago, he took up residence at the Lexington Hotel, and while here, would report his most frequent encounters with the ghost. While living at the Lexington Hotel, there were many times when Capone's men would hear from strange begging for the specter to leave him in peace. On several occasions, bodyguards broke into his rooms, fearing that someone had gotten to their boss. Capone would then tell them of Clark's ghost. Whether the ghost was real or not, Capone certainly believed that he was. The crime boss even went so far as to contact a psychic named Alice Britt to get rid of Clark's angry spirit. Not long after a seance was conducted to try and rid Capone of the vengeful spirit, Jaime Cornish, Capone's personal valet, also believed that he saw the ghost. He entered the lounge of Capone's apartment and spotted a tall man standing near the window. He demanded to know the man's identity, but the shadowy figure slipped behind a curtain and out of sight.
Gun malls. A gun mall, or gangster mall, is a female companion of a male professional criminal. A famous cow. Ghostly hitchhikers. The Green Mill Cocktail Lounge. Al Capone's favorite speakeasy in the 1920s. Capone's associate, Jack Machine Gun McGurn, who owned part of the club, slashed and stabbed singer Joe E. Lewis in 1927 for considering an offer from a rival club.
Joe Louis had suffered a fractured skull, had over a dozen knife wounds in his head, and part of his tongue was cut off. His right arm was paralyzed, and his left wasn't much better. His mind was cloudy, and he had to be retaught how to speak. Frank Sinatra portrayed his friend Louis in a film bio called The Joker is Wild in 1957. Available to see on YouTube if you so desire. Big Jim Colosimo with his second wife, the singer Dale Winter. On May 11, 1920, Big Jim Colosimo was shot to death in his own restaurant, allegedly by notorious New York hitman Frankie Yale, on orders from Johnny Torrio. Before Capone, there was Big Jim Colosimo. The father of the Chicago outfit met his fate at the end of a gun. Tony Lombardo, head of the Unione Siciliana and associate of Al Capone. He was fatally shot on September 7, 1928. An arrow points to the body of the slain gang chieftain on the sidewalk. Hard times, man, hard times. The music is a killer, isn't it? Like, hell yeah. Hey, Lynn. Love you, girl. The brazen daytime assassination in the Loop led to retaliatory killings that included the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago. There you go, Donnie.
I saw that movie.
John Herbert Dillinger, June 22, 1903 to July 22, 1934, was an American gangster during the Great Depression. He led the Dillinger Gang, which was accused of robbing 24 banks and 4 police stations. Perhaps the most famous bank robber in U.S. history from 1933 to July 1934. You know, that's just nasty. That's just nasty. Anna Sage, nicknamed the Woman in Red, best known for having assisted the Federal Bureau of Investigation in tracking down gangster John Dillinger. Outside Chicago's Biograph Theater, notorious criminal John Dillinger, public enemy number 1, is killed in a hail of bullets fired by federal agents in front of the Biograph Theater. at that, man. That ain't fair. I don't care who you are. Hey, I didn't.
Well, that doesn't look very fair to me. The alley today.
I agree, Edna. Oh yeah, it was.
Legend has it that Dillinger's ghost still haunts this very alley. A shadowy figure has been seen either running along the sidewalk or in the alley itself, and suddenly disappears upon falling to the ground.
Tearing it up. Good stuff. Biograph.
Dillinger or not, the ghost of a man running and disappearing into the alley has been reported by countless witnesses over the years.
Johnny Depp, ladies and gentlemen. Woo!
Charles Dean O'Banion was an American mobster in Chicago during the bootlegging wars of the 1920s. He was the main rival of Johnny Torrio and Al Capone.
She's a pretty young thing, isn't she? Bless her heart.
As a cover for Criminal Activities, he bought into Schofield's Flower Shop at 738 North State Street. Mob etiquette demanded that gangsters spend thousands of dollars on funeral arrangements.
I find it so interesting being a floral designer. The flowers they used back then, how they put them together, mesmerizing. Look at that. Look at that. I do that all day long, ladies and gentlemen.
And thanks to O'Banion's connections, Schofield's quickly became the premier flower shop of organized criminals. The mobster florist.
Hey, Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah. Yep.
On the morning of November 10th, 1924, O'Banion was arranging chrysanthemums in the back room.
Yeah, I do, Glenn. Think about it all the time, because I'm weird like that.
His bodyguard, Louis Altieri, had claimed he was sick with a hangover and did not come to the flower shop that day.
Wow. Johnny, I hate that disloyalty, man. I do. I can't stand it. It's just fixing my craw.
Frankie Yale entered the shop with John Scalise and Albert and Selmy.
Hey, Big Cole. Hey, Nightmare. Good looking boys, huh?
Hello, boys, greeted O'Banion. You from Mike Merlot's? And stuck out his hand in greeting. Shots rang out, and O'Banion fell to the ground, mortally wounded.
Again, I say not fair. Let the man finish his arrangement. I mean, come on, man. Again, that music.
The building is gone
Get up,
and is now
bake some
a
cupcakes.
parking lot.
Gatekeepers, where's my blue wrenches, man? Bake you some cupcakes. Get them, get them, get them, get them, get them. Woo, you bastard. Slid right up in here. Broke into the wrong damn podcast, didn't you? Where's my cupcakes?
Charles
Where's
Dean
my-
O'Banion, July 8th, 1892. November 10th,
Bake
1924.
them. Bake them while you got them. Get them, get them, get them, wrenches. Son of a bitch broke into my podcast.
Florist to the mob.
Florist to the mob. Get him, Nightmare. Black Ops mods, ladies and gentlemen. Get you some cupcakes, you mofos. This is so sad, Donnie. Donnie, it's so
Camp
sad.
Douglas.
Yeah.
Chat, look at this. It's horrible.
80 acres of hell. Many have heard of Andersonville and alleged allegations of mistreatment of Union POWs, but none come worse than that of Camp Douglas, a prisoner of war camp in Chicago, Illinois.
Mofo.
Over 1,800 Confederate soldiers passed through the prison camp, which eventually came to be known as the North Andersonville for its inhumanity.
Not enough stress tea in the world, ladies and gentlemen.
Confederate mound at Oak Woods.
Need a damn 55-gallon drum of this shit. That's beautiful music for this, I'm telling you. I know, Linda, right?
To die in Chicago.
Out of respect, you know.
Confederate prisoners at Camp Douglas.
They were soldiers. No need to treat POWs this way. It's absolutely appalling.
Today, condominiums fill most of the site where Camp Douglas stood. Often a soldier's ghost is seen peeking out of the condo windows.
But it's a new house!
Eternal Silence, a monument at Graceland Cemetery. It is said to show those who look into its eyes a vision of their death.
That's scary.
Now that's more than a little scary.
Beautiful, isn't it uncommon? Beautiful guitar, beautiful. Get you some sage, everybody.
The ghost of the Eastland disaster.
This is just the intro, ladies and gentlemen.
On July 24, 1915, the SS Eastland was parked along the Chicago River downtown.
Obviously, one of the great tragedies in Chicago's history, the largest loss of life at a single incident in the history of the city.
The Eastland was a boat. It's about the size of a mini cruise ship. It was docked in front of the Reed Murdoch building on July 24th, 1915. After the boat capsized, there was 2,500 people that went into the water, and 844 people lost their lives, including 17 entire families.
Nobody famous was on that boat. Nobody famous died, unlike the Titanic. It was working class people, immigrants from the Western Electric Company on Cicero and Berwyn.
They brought the bodies to the 2nd Regiment Armory, and that building later on would become famous because it was turned into Harpo Studios in the 1980s. For the site, people have reported of hearing screams and cries of terror coming from the river, right where the Eastland was docked, faces being seen in the water. There's also reports of people seeing people drowning in the river. Harpo Studios, where Harpo Studios was. They tore it down last year. There's reports of seeing ghosts and apparitions inside Harpo Studios. The most popular one was the Gray Lady, who they believe was one of the victims at the Eastland tragedy.
What I think should really haunt Chicagoans about that disaster was how long it was ignored and covered up. For almost a century, most of official Chicago ignored that event. It didn't reshape any policy. Unlike the Iroquois Theater Fire, which helped create safety standards in public buildings where you have panic bars, other tragedies in the city have literally reshaped the world and how we relate to one another in space.
Tragedy, man. Unnecessary.
back. I'm still watching.
Chicago, ladies and gentlemen. The Windy City. I know that's true. I don't want to go there. folks. Woo! Chicago. There you go. That's what we're going to be talking about. And Mr. Donny Cho is going to come in here pretty soon and tell us a little bit about some of the things that he studied on that video. He's going to tell us a little bit about the massacre at Fort Dearborn. And yes, Linda, absolutely. The land is cursed. I believe so too. And I think that you guys, have you been listening to blues all night, Annette? I'm telling you,
I'm
listening to
back.
blues will dig it up and turn it out. So, Mr. Cho, your
Yes.
thoughts?
Well, one of the
It's a
things you
happening
start
town.
one of the things you start realizing once you start going through these litany of disasters and bad events that have happened throughout Chicago's history is,
Real.
man, I think this place might be cursed or something, you know? There's some bad juju going on. And then from the paranormal side, I've heard numerous shows talking about this where they say, like, if you had to give like the top two or top three most haunted cities in America,
Yeah.
a lot of people say it's New Orleans and Chicago. Um,
Yeah. And New York. I think anywhere you have that kind of, just a cacophony of energy, decade after decade after decade. And it's usually those kind of spaces, especially on the East Coast, with such a caged amount of just extra, you know, and those became the cities. I was looking way back. I was looking, going back to Jamestown, and when I was going through this whole friggin' tragedy this week, I binge watched like three three seasons of Jamestown. I shit you not, and the whole time I know that it's all complete and total BS. But there was, I love historical things, and it was well done. It was well done, and it did have some truth in there. But again, these people, showed up, they died. Some of them, 10, people out of, 50 people out of 500 would survive. And then, but in this episode, the series that they did, they had time to go around and conspire and, go against each other and change their clothes and look good. And, I have all these storylines and stuff. So it was based on fact. Let's put it that way. But when you really start digging, you find out Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, hell, St. Augustine, 40 years ahead of them. You never learn about that in school. And then they had up in Quebec, in Canada, another settlement there you never hear about. But these cities, the way they were converged upon by the Europeans and pushing all the Native Americans back, you've got your right away conflict. You had conflict before they got there amongst the naturals, as they were calling it in Jamestown, the naturals. But you had that. So again, in Chicago, Donnie and I have learned, and I'm sure he'll go much deeper into. I got to download that. That's the last thing I forgot to download that slide. I got your slideshow, but I believe the land is cursed, Donnie. I swear to God, this
oh, now
tragedy,
after all the research I've been doing, that place is cursed as hell. Yeah.
the blood soaked soil. If you guys had any idea, and I didn't do a lot on this, and I didn't do a vid on this, and I'll just barely touch on it, but I cannot do it justice, is the slaughterhouses and the whole union, the meat packers union, all of this, the birthplace in Chicago, Illinois. I mean, surely, they had slaughterhouses and they had your farms and you had you had those things, but nothing like Chicago. And it was down and dirty and bloody and nasty and just excessive and inhumane and horrid. And the blood soaked down from that on top of everything else right into the lake, the whole water system and everything else. I mean, this whole land is soaked in blood and bullets and tragedy and um, mysteries and mayhem and death and dying and just
And
and
lots of
cows,
ghosts. Lots and lots of ghosts.
lots and lots of ghosts. And another thing is Fort Douglas. We're not going to really dig deep into, but this was known as the Andersonville of Illinois, to die in Chicago. if you've ever heard anything about the Civil War prison camps, if you can only imagine, and they focus on Andersonville and how Union troops were treated there because, of course, the Southern Confederacy couldn't even feed itself, right? So, oh God, yes, Aunt Edna, to this day, seriously. So they, oh geez, it's just we're digging and I'm calling Donnie and I'm like, did you know that? And he's like, oh, you have no idea. This was even worse. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But it's just that's it. So you've got Fort Douglas, and then they take all these poor people that they've mistreated, and the cold. Can you imagine Chicago cold? Now you've got no blankets, no shelter, and being it's just complete torture, just craziness. And they all die. They throw them all in a mass grave. They get a little monument, as you saw there in the tape. This is it, and then they build condos on the land. And all the people, well, but this is a brand new place. I don't understand why I've got Confederate soldiers in my kitchen. You know, this is the antithesis of everything that's paranormal. I think energy driven, negativity begets negativity, and everything is just drawn here. And it caught the beer wars of the late 20s, the Roaring 20s, and the 30s. Horrid, the bloodshed in that, and it's just continuous. It's just one wave of blood and nasty, and to this day, I mean, I can't imagine. I don't know if burning it all to the ground and just salting it, about 6 feet under would. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think, Donnie?
I
You
think
what?
that place. I think that place has got like some straight up fire demon going around.
Yeah,
Really.
and it's drawing all kinds of stuff to this day. So Donnie and I thought we'll do as much as we can tonight. We're gonna finish up with Steve tomorrow. We're gonna bring in like H.H. Holmes and some of the other ghost stories, and he's gonna do cryptids and these humanoid things, and I think Chicago Mothman and some other stuff tomorrow night with Steve. But tonight we're gonna try to power through the rest of this, go through the portal, absolutely, and power through this. And Donnie, you're going to give us a little bit on Fort Dearborn and why you think this land is cursed and soaked in blood, bullets, and tragedy. Go, my
Hmm.
friend. Right back. I'm right here. But you
Okay.
just floor is yours.
Well, one of the things I wanted to see is it seemed like there was some kind of weird Native American curse on it, the way all the history played out. So I just dug into the history and I went back and back and back, and I was like, was there some kind of battle that took place here? Was this on top of some Native American burial mounds or something? Like, what's going on that this place, so much crazy stuff keeps happening here? So until I finally went back to the story of Chicago's original founding. Um, oh, there it is. That's okay. And the name of the place is called Fort Dearborn. This is back in 1812. This has a lot to do with the War of 1812, which is a little known war. They don't talk that much about it in history classes. But in 1812, the American military set up a fort on, near basically where the Chicago River meets Lake Michigan, which that area right now is like downtown Chicago. I mean, there's skyscrapers sitting on top of that site right now. And as I got to learn more about this story, I was like, well, this is where the curse is clearly from. It was a massacre site between U.S. soldiers and their families and Potawatomi tribe people. So once I found out about this story, then it became very clear. Oh, this is where the curse comes from. So where to begin about the background? Real brief, I guess. The War of 1812 was, you could kind of see it as like the sequel to the American Revolution. It was like the American Revolution Part 2. This time, the Americans strike back because it was actually the Americans who declared war on the British. There were all these trade embargoes going on. There was this, basically, the British Empire was at war with Napoleon. And because France and Britain were so hard fighting each other, they had all these trade embargoes in place. And basically Britain banned the U.S. from trading with France. France banned the U.S. from trading with Britain, and then the U.S. is like, what the heck? We can't trade with anybody. And then finally, war breaks out. It was basically treated as a proxy war, where the British basically at this point controlled all of Canada, and they were using the Native Americans as their allies, as kind of their proxy army to fight back against the Americans who were encroaching westward. Native Americans obviously didn't want them on their land or want them creeping up on their land, so they teamed up with the British. British Empire armed them, and that conflict eventually made its way to the site that would eventually become Chicago at Fort Dearborn. And I guess so. To start with this story, basically what happened at Fort Dearborn was there was an American captain who was running the place who had to evacuate because the next fort over, Fort Mackinac, had been taken over by the British. So the American general was like, "We can't supply you folks at Fort Dearborn, so you're gonna have to evacuate, head back to Fort Wayne because the British are counterattacking. They're taking over forts in that area with the aid of the Native Americans." And at this time, there was a lot of stuff going on with Native American history at this time. This is when Tecumseh was in his prime. I think people already know who he is. And then he had his brother, the prophet Tenskwatawa, who was basically going around teaching Native Americans that the Europeans were like born of evil spirits and they must be eradicated. And there were a lot of these Native American tribes, some of whom were choosing not to mess with the Americans. They were trying to be friendly with them and have relations. But then other tribes and other people in other tribes kind of adopted Tenskwatawa's teachings and ideologies and started and hooked up with Tecumseh and tried to start their own nation and fight back against the Americans. And the Potawatomi Indians, they were the neighbors to Fort Dearborn. When the Fort Dearborn forces had to be evacuated to Fort Wayne, with the captains by the name of Nathan Heald, he struck a deal with the Potawatomi tribe. Also, by this point, everyone in the surrounding area, like all the settlers, they all basically moved into the fort because the Native American warriors were basically going around to homesteads and pretty much butchering entire families. So people were freaking out. They all huddle into Fort Dearborn. They form a militia because that's where, the U.S. Army is there. And then it's time for them to evacuate. Captain Heald strikes a deal with the Potawatomi, basically saying that if you guys help us, if you don't attack us, and if you escort us out, we'll give you all this ammunition, all these weapons, and all this alcohol. Potawatomis are like, okay, we'll do that. But then, contrary to his promise, he winds up dumping it all in the river. Potawatomi tribes catch wind of this. So as the soldiers and as their families are basically evacuating to Fort Wayne, they march south along the Chicago River, and basically they're ambushed by Potawatomi warriors. And the Americans were pretty much, most of them were slaughtered. A lot of women and children were killed. There were some prisoners that they took, that the Potawatomis actually took these American prisoners and sold them as slaves, which I never heard Native Americans doing before.
Yep.
This is overall like a very horrible story. So it was something like, hold on, let me find so it was 38 military killed, 28 captured, 14 civilians killed, women and children, and 13 captured and sold off into slavery. Okay, so here's the worst part.
And there's one of your first bloodbaths, one of your first recorded that we know of.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about that. I'm not too familiar with the Blackfoot, especially like where each tribe was from. I didn't have much knowledge of that prior.
And then we're getting scattered at this point.
Okay, there's so much bad crap about this. There was this other captain called William Wells, and he was actually friendly with the natives. He tried to broker peace, and he was very sympathetic towards them. And basically, what happened during the battle was the soldiers figured out that they were going to get ambushed. So Captain Heald orders them all to go onto the sand dune where he thinks the Potawatomi soldiers are attacking. And then they get higher ground, so they're able to fight against them. But then they didn't realize that there were going to be so many of them. And the chief of the Potawatomi tribe was actually one of like the most famous Native American warriors in like the entire country. And he was actually trying to convince his tribesmen, hey guys, don't be doing this. Don't do this. Right. He tried to warn the Americans. He tried to stop his young tribesmen. Tecumseh had gone up to him to try to get him to join their cause. But then he didn't want anything to do with it because he was like an American war hero. This guy met like Thomas Jefferson and everything.
Yeah, Tecumseh was very Washingtonian, like very much like George Washington. He was like he went up, and I'll paraphrase because I certainly don't know it word for word, but he went up to this one before the War of 1812, and basically said, "Look, my brother, basically we fellow human. We are here, we were fine. We had some skirmishes among tribes, but basically we had a balance. We had been, our great spirit, our creator gave us this land to nourish us and to have a mutual respect. And he gave my white brother land across the waters, and kept us separated that way, and gave land to you to do the same with, to care for and to care for you. And that was not enough for you. You had to come over here and then take ours. And then he basically looked at him in the eye and said, my brother, I do not think that I can have peace with you. Show me how that's going to work, because you're over here doing this and you're telling me that we're wrong, and you're pushing us back and back till we can go no further. Tecumseh spoke truth. He spoke it through peaceful words and a loyalty. There's that loyalty we were talking about earlier, and a moral compass of, we do not kill women and children. If you're going to make us fight, we are going to fight warrior to warrior. And he had that kind of respect. He earned that respect the same way that George Washington did amongst his people. And oddly enough, sorry for jumping on you there, Donnie, but oddly enough, in 1812, he was heralded hero by the English side and by the history.
Oh yeah, he was a friend to the British.
Yeah,
there were some British officers that actually wrote accounts about how they'd hang out with him. They were like really impressed by him,
and as a hero on almost a losing side, because that whole thing was like America trying to push around Canada and tell Canada
it's the lost cause.
What it couldn't even do. So the War of 1812 was really more like Canada's rebellion against tyranny, because we were trying to trump on their stuff, and the Native Americans had very difficult choices to make on whose side, where they were going to stand, and that whole thing was horrid. But this here at Fort Dearborn, as Donnie has dug back and looked through the history, found that this was such an offense, very much like our Wounded Knee, very much like Gettysburg, very much like so many other battles you could name. And it was like a marking of time almost, Donnie, where and a cursed on a cursed land that continued to be washed in blood again to this day. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, and it gets worse actually.
Okay.
So the way the battle actually went down was the soldiers get separated from the main wagon train with all the civilians, all the women and children, all the wives and children of the soldiers. Soldiers are up on the dune trying to fight off the Potawatomi. Another group of Potawatomi, right, comes in from the other side. And now they basically separated the soldiers from the civilians, and then they surrounded both groups. And then with the wagon train, there were only like 2 militiamen defending it. So they kill him, and then they killed a few of the women. And then basically they lined up all the kids and they were like, "Hey, soldiers, why don't you come down from there? We got your kids." And they're like, "No." And then they slit one of the kids' throats, bring out the next kid one by one,
One by
until
one by
finally
one.
William Wells, who I said earlier was actually like a very friendly and sympathetic to the Potawatomi, he tries to ride out to try to help the kids and save them. Like, but he gets shot down while he's on the way there. They cut out his heart, Sysco, and the Potawatomi they ate it raw
Hmm.
on the battlefield.
On the battlefield. This is what they did. And this kind of, again, this kind of energy soaked into a ground. Think about where this happened. Everything happened right there, Donnie, where the main part of Chicago, downtown Chicago, stands today, correct?
This is right in downtown Chicago.
You can walk through downtown Chicago, and all that's left of this fort is kind of like stars and a angle in the sidewalk that shows like the cornerstones of where the fort stood, and the busy streets go back and forth, and all these buildings and office buildings and people back and forth all the time over this ground where this happened, where Donnie is describing that this happened.
So
It's baked into the structure of the city.
so
It's
there
incredible.
there's a lot of different accounts and some of them contradict with each other, but there were some, I mean, I saw this one account which I'm not sure is true. The one about them like cutting out William Wells's heart and eating it, that much, I mean, that's pretty
That's
much
in
written
there.
down in the history books.
Hey, cool,
But then
Chad.
some people said they actually wound up doing that to like a lot of the women and children and kids that had been killed as well. Like they just
Yep.
cut out their hearts in some kind of ceremony and
Yep,
ate
it's
them.
so true. So this is,
Um,
it's like almost like Aztec ground where they had a lot of sacrifices. This whole city was built on ground that had this kind of, stuff happening to it. This is something that's baked into the soil. And then again, you've got right there, they could have built Fort Douglas anywhere. They put it right there. It's almost like this ground is it's like a magnet for this negativity and this kind of constant human sacrifice. It's a trip. There's some real
yeah, it
truth.
was described as like they were doing it like ceremoniously.
Right.
So they were probably doing some crazy juju stuff,
Crazy other
bad
stuff too.
juju.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a
Um,
doubt. So I believe that it was cursed. You believe that it was cursed, Donnie?
the other thing that's also very
Gotta get to this
misfortunate.
fire too. Go ahead.
The other thing that's also very misfortunate was that there were also a band of Miami Indians who were friendly to the Americans, and they were actually helping the Americans and escorting them. And after the Fort Dearborn, well, some people call it a battle, it's really a massacre. After
Right.
the Fort Dearborn massacre, the governor of the Illinois Territory at the time, William Henry Harrison, who eventually went on to becoming the shortest serving president in America's history.
Hmm.
Um, he actually blamed the Miami Indians because I guess some people told him that they were helping the Potawatomi. Other people were saying that no, they were defending the Americans, they were trying to save them. Didn't matter because according to Governor Harrison, he's like, you know what? Let's kick them off their land in retaliation.
Yep.
And
And there
then
you go. There you have it.
because of the Fort Dearborn massacre, the U.S. government changed a lot of its policies and a lot of its diplomatic, I guess, stance with the Native Americans. Because before there were still people who were sympathetic to them and talking about, let's work out some deals. But then once the word of the Fort Dearborn massacre came out, and then once people realized that they had eaten this dude's heart right on the battlefield, Americans were like, "Oh my God, these people are monsters. We got to get rid of them."
And that was it. And that caused
And
like
that changed a lot, and that affected a lot of tribes that had
right,
nothing to do with that. So
right.
that's the other real misfortunate thing about the Fort Dearborn massacre. So I'm just like, yo,
All
if
that,
Chicago is cursed, it's
yeah,
because of that.
negativity. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And it's all of that and all the way it was done and the backstabbing and very much like Rome and everything else. I mean, there's always been conflict and there's always been death and dying, but it's also the way that people do something like this, and then this ground just seems to continuously call. And Susan said she's lived there and she's familiar with the area and knows how tough and rough and ready it is. But to this day, just look at, last weekend, what was going on there. It's still continuing, and it seems to be this ground because, kids are dying last weekend that fell exactly where Dillinger fell and where Big Jim Colosimo fell and where Torrio fell and, all these others, Banyan and everybody else. It's just blood on top of blood on top of blood on top of blood on top of tragedy on top of tragedy. And if
And
you're ready,
Palmer
my friend, we can move right into
and
the
Palmer lives in
Chicago.
Harrison Township.
Oh, really? There you
Yeah.
go.
Well, and I
There you
guess I'm
go.
assuming it's after William Henry Harrison, who was basically a war hero for being really good at killing Native Americans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very much like good old Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
Say what you will about Andrew Jackson. He's
So
the
it
one
was
that,
like
yeah.
Fort Dearborn was Native Americans winning the battle, but ultimately causes them to lose the war
Yep.
and it caused a lot of pain and suffering for a lot of other Native Americans who had nothing to do with that.
So more like a domino effect into tragedy.
There was probably something really dark ritualistic magic that was taking place. I mean, clearly, if they're straight up eating a dude's heart raw, which
Yeah.
prior to this story, I didn't even know that was something Native Americans even
Well,
did.
in some cases, they would do that to just Aztecs did that as well. And they
Yeah.
did that to absorb that person's like basically powers and
Mhm.
everything. It's very skinwalker. It's very in voodoo in a lot of different cultures into
Yeah.
Africa and all around. So I mean, but once you start doing that, you're straight up into something a lot deeper and darker than just defending your territory and your family
Yeah.
and your heritage.
And their
You
chief
get a
tried to
little
stop
different.
it.
Yeah, it
Remember
gets
that, folks. Yeah.
so one of the tragedies that came from this very area in 1871, Donnie, if you're ready to move through to get a little hot in here, it's getting hot in here. There's another individual that truly suffered. It seems on a smaller scale after what we just talked about. Great job, Donnie, by the way.
Mhm.
The Mrs. O'Leary's cow. And if you have ever heard the story of the Chicago fire of 1871, you've more than likely heard the songs that were written about the Great Chicago Fire, and it's going to be a hot time in the old town tonight. That was written about the Chicago fire, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, supposedly kicking over in the barn as she was in at like 2 a.m. Milking a cow in the middle of the night in her barn. He supposedly kicked over a lantern and started one of the largest fires known to man in the history of the United States. And I have a little video on that, Donnie, if you're ready. It's Toby needs a cigarette. This is a good time. It runs
Okay.
about 10 minutes and it's extremely informative. I like to thank the YouTube channel, Chicago local newscasters there, and also the PBS Chicago Library put up some good stuff. So there's some excerpts of that. There's if you're interested in seeing the rest of that, there's credits in the video for those YouTube channels. But here I give to you another video on another tragedy in Chicago that I'm sure has fired up, pardon the pun, more than its share of ghosts, probably haunting to this very day. So here we go. The Chicago Fire, 1871.
Chicago was unseasonably hot and dry in the fall of 1871. The city had gone months without rain.
It is built so much out of wood.
The streets are wood. The bridges are wood. It's so hot that the tar on some of the roofs starts to blister in the sun.
The fire department consisted of just 185 firemen in a city of 300,000. They relied on horse-drawn, steam-powered engines with little water pressure.
The fire department had 20 fires just in the first week of October. So they already knew that the conditions in Chicago were bad.
Each time a fire erupted, a watchman in the courthouse tower rang the 5.5-ton bell. The night before Mrs. O'Leary's barn caught fire, a planing mill on the city's west side went up in flames, leveling 4 square blocks. Firefighters quelled the blaze after 17 grueling hours. Their clothing was burned, their eyes red and swollen.
So when you consider that those firefighters were worn out, their equipment was damaged, they were vulnerable.
The next morning, William Bross's Tribune made a prophetic warning. A spark might set a fire which could sweep from end to end of the city.
Everything, all the wood, all that combustible material was brittle. It was ready to catch on fire. It just needed a spark.
Catherine O'Leary went to bed that Sunday evening, October 8th at 8 o'clock. Her barn was stocked with fresh hay, and she was nursing a sore foot. Through her thin bedroom wall, O'Leary could hear her tenants, the McLaughlins, welcoming a relative from Ireland.
And Mr. McLaughlin, I guess, was a great fiddle player. So they were having this party, coming and going, dancing. Mrs. O'Leary stated that she was having trouble sleeping because she could hear all the noise going on in the McLaughlin's house.
I could hear from my own bedroom. Could hear them going on. There was a little music there. Her husband was a fiddler.
O'Leary had barely drifted off to sleep when her barn began to burn. What exactly triggered the blaze remains shrouded in mystery, legend, and lies.
The myth is that Mrs. O'Leary was out in her barn and she was milking her cow and the cow knocked over a lantern. That's ridiculous, really, when you think about it, because nobody would be milking a cow at 9 o'clock at night.
O'Leary said she had no idea how the fire started.
Well, I ran out, and the whole barn was on fire, and upon my word, I could not tell any more about the fire.
She just started crying and screaming. I can only imagine how desperate she had to have felt.
A watchman in the courthouse tower named Matthias Schaefer spotted smoke, and the giant alarm bell was sounded.
He got word out to the fire company, but he mislocated the fire. So he sent the engines to the wrong place.
His blunder was just enough to give the fire a foothold. Several engine companies arrived 45 minutes later, but by then, it was too late. The blaze had consumed several blocks. Some Chicagoans gathered to enjoy the spectacle, unaware of the danger.
People treated fires like entertainment. There's a fire, let's go watch. So people were on their rooftops, people were on their front porches, people were out in the street.
Joseph Edgar Chamberlain was one of the first reporters on the scene. It was the scoop of a lifetime, but Chamberlain couldn't help but dismiss the Irish immigrants he encountered. More casks of whiskey appeared, he wrote, and scores of excited men drank deeply of their contents.
He calls them drunks, inebriates, women are harlots. And after all, it was only the saloons and the brothels and the barns of the Irish immigrants that were burning. And was that really a loss?
It quickly became clear this was no ordinary fire. Powerful winds drove the blaze 500 feet in the air, whipping up whirling pockets of air known as fire devils. They sucked entire roofs off buildings and flung them hundreds of yards over firemen's heads, spreading the flames.
You could actually feel your lungs on fire. Because what's happening now is, and was really terrifying, is the fire was in the air. It's in the sky right above you. So this looks like the apocalypse. There were flocks of pigeons, for example, in Chicago that were just sucked into the fire.
Catherine O'Leary described a convulsion of wind and sound.
The wind blowed every way. You could not tell one way more than the other way. You would hear the roar of the fire like a cannon. The roar of the fire, you never heard such a thing.
The residents, they're losing everything. Everything that they knew and had was going up in flames. People like the O'Learys were positively petrified.
I got frightened. I got the way I did not know when I saw everything burn up in the barn.
And she said, my mind totally blanked out. I was screaming and yelling, my house, what's happening?
The O'Learys also stood to lose their beloved Holy Family Church less than a mile west.
So here you have this imposing church, and the fire's heading right for it.
Father Arnold Damon was 800 miles away. He was preaching a mission in Brooklyn, New York, when a telegram delivered the news.
He got down on his knees and prayed all night before promising Our Lady of Perpetual Help that if the church and the school, St. Ignatius College, were saved, that he would keep 7 lights burning.
Meanwhile, firefighters began to retreat. They lacked the manpower to stop the blaze as it burned toward the Chicago River. There, they watched helplessly as the wind blew flaming debris across the grease-slickened water.
And this is something that nobody thought was going to happen. They thought in some ways the river was a kind of natural container, and it wasn't. What is lining the rivers, too, the lumber and the grain, these materials are kind of fuel for the fire.
Just east of the river was the Southside Gas Works, which supplied light to much of the city. At midnight, its holding tank exploded, plunging Chicago into darkness and adding more fuel to the fire. From there, the blaze headed towards the great civic buildings of the business district, the very heart of the city.
The people in the hotels who had been up on the roofs begin to realize they're not so safe at all. And there begins to be panic in the streets.
A messenger summoned Mayor Roswell B. Mason from his sleep.
Roswell Mason was at home in his bed, and a man pulls up on horseback and yells from outside the window, "Mayor, the city is burning." Mayor Mason rides his horse through the streets, going to the courthouse, and he sends out a telegraph to nearby cities like Milwaukee and Detroit that says, before morning, more than 100,000 people will be without food and shelter. Can you help us?
While Mason pleaded for assistance, the winds blew burning timber onto the courthouse.
This is the most important building in the city. It's a building that was considered to be fireproof.
The cupola burst into flames, filling the basement jail with thick smoke. Prisoners banged their iron cell doors and screamed for help.
All the prisoners were on the verge of being either burnt alive or killed by smoke inhalation. And when Mayor Mason found out about this, he very quickly sprawled out a proclamation being like, release all of them right now.
Jailers tried to maintain custody of prisoners out on the street, but murderers and thieves blended into the panicked crowds and disappeared into the night. The courthouse bell continued to toll as the building was consumed by flames.
This gigantic bell comes thundering down and hits the floor with this tremendous ring. If you're writing a novel, that's symbolism, you know? If that goes, anything can go.
100-foot walls of flames swept entire blocks, devouring hotels, banks, churches, and theaters.
The heat was so intense that the limestone facade sloughed off the side of the buildings. Huge chunks of limestone are falling to the ground as people are running by these buildings.
Mayor Mason could do little but order the demolition of some buildings in a futile effort to stop the advancing fire.
I think it would have been devastating to him to see the city destroyed before his eyes, the city that he helped build, the city that he had made his home and had dedicated his life to serving.
Tribune publisher William Ross and his wife had entertained visitors at their Terrace Row mansion earlier that night. A panicked guest woke them up around 2 a.m.
My family were very much alarmed at the glare which illuminated the sky and lake. I saw that a dreadful disaster was impending over Chicago.
Ross rushed to the Tribune offices in the central business district. He would never forget the devastation he saw along the way.
The courthouse, post office, Farwell Hall, Tremont House, Sherman House, and all the splendid buildings on LaSalle and Wells Streets were burning with a sublimity of effect which awed me. All the adjectives in the language would fail to convey the intensity of its wonders. Crowds of men, women, and children were huddling away, running first in one direction, then in another, shouting and crying in their terror, and trying to save anything they could lay their hands on, no matter how trivial in value. Well, every now and then, explosions which seemed almost to shake the solid earth would reverberate through the air and add to the terrors of the poor people.
People are actually carrying disabled family members through the fire. The poor are carrying their mattresses on their heads. Women from wealthy homes which look to have all their jewelry on them.
Many tried to escape across the river on wooden bridges.
And these became intensely crowded, congested sites as everybody was trying to get out.
The fire thundered toward the waterworks. Completed 2 years earlier to pump clean water from Lake Michigan, this technological marvel was a source of civic pride. A crew stood guard over the water tower and pumping station. Still, ferocious winds blew burning timber onto the station's roof.
And when the roof catches fire and falls down and destroys the pumps, that's it, you're done. Absolutely. That cut off all the water that the fire department could use.
Water surging out of fire hydrants across the city trickled to a stop. Northsiders buried valuables in the ground, including at least one piano. Most grabbed a few cherished items, gathered their families, and ran. As the north side erupted in flames, thousands of men, women, and children fled to the city's fringes. Some retreated west to the prairie, where they huddled on the ground. Others rushed east to an unlikely refuge. The city had been removing caskets from an old cemetery to make room for Lincoln Park. When the fire reached the cemetery, people climbed into empty graves.
Some people apparently died in the open graves. They jumped into the graves to stay away from the fires, and of course they suffocated.
Still others hurried to a notorious lakefront vice district called the Sands.
But look, the fire isn't class conscious. The fire burns everything. So you've got prostitutes, and you've got criminals, and you've got poor, and you've got rich. The fire's a real equalizer.
Many waded into the lake up to their waists and stayed there for hours, desperate to avoid the searing heat. As the sun rose over Lake Michigan on Monday morning, the fire had been raging for 10 hours. And yet it still showed no sign of slowing down, continuing to spread north and south. In the early morning light, Catherine O'Leary could see the vast clouds of smoke that marked the destruction of the business district and north side. William Bross's Tribune now lay in ruins, and the blaze rumbled steadily toward his lakefront mansion. He hastily loaded some prized possessions onto a wagon. It was the last he ever saw of those belongings. On Monday night, rain began to fall on Chicago. It felt like divine intervention to many. The fire had burned a path of destruction 4 miles long and almost a mile wide. It had mowed down most everything in its way, creating an open vista from the north side all the way to the south.
The city was a landscape of utter devastation, really total carnage. So much of the city had burned away, had turned into ash and to dust and was gone. So it was this flat and leveled, frightening landscape.
You're seeing rubble in the ground. You're seeing remnants of things that are melted in perverse and weird ways.
And now you don't have a street address. There's no street signs in the city. It's a strange place. People wandered around. They didn't know where they were in the ruins. It's ghost city, you know? There's no landmarks. It's an awful thing.
A third of Chicago's 300,000 citizens were homeless. Survivors, desperate for a blanket and a meal, took shelter in churches and schools. For families who'd been separated during the fire, a frantic search began for lost loved ones.
So people found each other by going to landmarks. People found each other by putting ads in the newspapers. Or maybe you never find them because they're dead. Not everybody gets reunited.
120 bodies were recovered, but an estimated 300 relatives, friends, and neighbors had died.
I think they undercounted because a lot of people were just vaporized by the fire or fell off the bridges into the water or drowned in the lake, or people just disappeared.
Fewer than a dozen buildings survived the path of the inferno between the river and Lincoln Park. While the fire had destroyed pumps and engines inside the waterworks, the hulking exteriors were undamaged. They would become enduring symbols of civic pride. A few north side homes were filled with smoke, but otherwise unscathed. And then there was the home of Catherine O'Leary. The barn where the fire started lay in ashes. But remarkably, her cottage survived, thanks to the quick thinking of her husband and a friend.
The men went and fixed 2 wash tubs at both hydrants. There's a hydrant in front of our place and a hydrant in front of Mrs. Murray's. Set 2 wash tubs and then began to put water on the little house and kept it wet all through until the fire was gone.
Mrs. O'Leary's business was lost. A horse and 5 cows burned to death in the barn, and only a calf was saved. She sent her husband to look for a 6th cow that she'd kept in the alley.
My husband spent 2 weeks looking for it and could not find it anywhere in the world. I could not get 5 cents. I had 6 cows there, a good horse there. I had a wagon and everything I was worth.
Unfortunately, their only hope was squelched.
And soon, Mrs. O'Leary's reputation would be destroyed. While the fire was still raging, a Chicago Evening Journal article had blamed her for starting it. A reporter for another newspaper, Michael Ahern, would later claim that he and 2 other journalists had concocted the whole story.
Stories are like seeds that grow. Once you plant that seed, you can't uproot it, especially when the story fits in with all sorts of social prejudice. One person is to blame because it simplifies things.
The Board of Police and Fire Commissioners conducted an inquiry into the causes of the fire. 50 people testified, but the star was witness number 5, Catherine O'Leary. Though she was only about 40 years old, reporters didn't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
They said that she was in her 70s and she was haggard and bending over and she was not articulate. They said she was hysterical. And I've read the inquest and it sounded like she was very clear and very concise in exactly what happened.
I was in bed myself and my husband and 5 children when this fire commenced.
Do you know how the fire caught?
I could not tell anything of the fire. Only that 2 men came by the door. I guess it was my husband. He ran back to the bedroom and said, "Kate, the barn is afire."
But when she left the inquest, they believed it and they published a report that she had absolutely nothing to do with the fire, that she was not responsible.
The inquiry did not turn up a single shred of evidence that anyone had been in the O'Leary barn on the night of the fire. Instead, the investigation blamed shoddy construction and lax enforcement of building codes.
Kate O'Leary didn't take much guff from people, and she very much stood her ground, and the judges agreed. They cleared her.
But rumors would quickly become fact in the fire's aftermath. Chicago began rebuilding so quickly that the ground was still hot to the touch. The first load of lumber arrived the same day the fire was extinguished.
But what surprised people is that there were businesses that opened on the day after the fire, selling things, food, blankets, anything.
William Kerfoot, who claimed that his little wood shack was the first building in the burned area, ironically made out of wood, and with a hand-painted sign that said, "All gone but wife, children, and energy."
Newspaperman William Bross had lost his home and belongings, but not his business. He and Joseph Medill continued to publish the Tribune from a makeshift office amidst the rubble.
Chicago will rise again. There's a sense that, this fire can't stop us, that we are destined to become even bigger and better of a city than we were before.
Bross hopped a train to New York to convince financiers that Chicago was still a sound investment.
Go to Chicago now. Young men, hurry there. Women, send your husbands. You will never again have such a chance to make money.
City of opportunity. It's a city of jobs. It's a city of places where you can come and start anew.
The supposedly fireproof Palmer House Hotel lay in ruins, but it would soon be resurrected thanks to the ingenuity of its architect. As the fire raged around him, John Van Osdale buried the hotel's blueprints in a basement hole encased in clay. When he later discovered the blueprints